Barna says children begin forming their worldviews between 15 and 18 months of age. And by the age of 13, it's almost entirely formed. And for the majority of people, research shows it is unlikely to change much, if at all, over the remainder of their lives.
Well, last time on the Maven Parent Podcast, Brett, we depressed everybody.
Deeply. You were the bearer of bad news, and this week I will be the bearer of good news. I'm here to encourage.
I hope people see how you just try to weasel your way in. You do this with the kids too. Like, oh yeah, mom said, but I'm the fun guy.
Yeah. Well, the kids know, number one, that I'm being sarcastic, and number two, they never believe it. They're like always mom's ally. No,
yeah,
actually, you know what? Actually, the girls are definitely mom's ally. The boys, they tend to side with dad.
Sometimes. But the listeners can see why. It's apparent.
Well, no, it's good. It's good gender identification. That's what it is, right? And so we'll take the best news possible from that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so last time we depressed everybody, basically because if you missed that podcast, you need to go back. Well, get a little sobering.
Let me remind them of that sobering.
Okay.
We looked at Barna research done with Arizona Christian University and the 7 cornerstones of a biblical worldview, and how the vast majority of our young people do not have those cornerstones, and how if you don't, then only like 2% will end up developing a biblical worldview. And this is what Barna says. He says, America's children are in the process of adopting syncretism as their predominant worldview. They are following in the footsteps of their parents, of whom only 2% have a biblical worldview, and 96% are syncretists.
Yes, our adults are doing no better than the young people. But Go ahead.
This mindset and lifestyle is modeled daily for their children and has become the default position for the majority of Christian adults, adolescents, and children. Syncretism is the summary name for a disparate, irreconcilable collection of beliefs and behaviors that define people's lives. It is a cut and paste approach to making sense of and responding to life. Rather than developing an internally consistent and philosophically coherent perspective on life, Barna says Americans embrace points of view, or actions that feel comfortable or seem most convenient or popular. That's what he means by syncretism is the predominant worldview. And going back to our analogy from the last episode of the podcast, we talked about the puzzle pieces. That's what we're doing. We're trying to put different puzzle pieces together. And he says, now
the ending part about, or that last part that you read about, our views and actions are basically what is comfortable to us and what is most convenient or popular.
Yeah, which goes back to what we constantly beat on in terms of the influence of the culture. How does culture powerfully shape us?
Yeah.
By presenting what is normal, by presenting what is popular, what is convenient.
Yeah.
And we go along in our views. And so now, okay, no more sobering, no more bad news. Okay. Barna says children begin forming their worldviews between 15 and 18 months of age. And by the age of 13, it's almost entirely formed. And for the majority of people, research shows it is unlikely to change much, if at all, over the remainder of their lives.
Okay.
Now, you might be saying, how is that hopeful? Or how is that good news?
Well, okay, so I don't think if you ask most people, when do you think someone's worldview starts to be shaped? And anyone would guess 15 to 18 months. If you go back into our archives, to our discipline talk, we talk about at that toddler stage, how we start teaching kids right from wrong and how we function in the world and what reality really is. And Barna just confirmed that idea that actually when we're really young, we start to learn oh, does the world revolve around me?
Yeah.
And, oh, is it right to scream and throw my toy? And when I do that, mom and dad just do what I want. And so that's pretty nice. Or do I learn, oh, that's not actually how I'm going to get my way? And so I just think it's so interesting because I think most of us wouldn't think your worldview starts being shaped when you're 15 months old. You're still eating like smashed carrots and,
Yeah.
you're in a diaper still.
Yeah. Well, you see it because you connect belief with behavior. And that's where a lot of us have disconnected those two things. And we don't understand the connection between belief and behavior or mind and heart or whatever, however you want to cash that out. And so because we disconnect those things, and think about how we do this in our relationship with God. Well, it's not about all the knowledge of God, about God that you can have. It's really about your relationship with him. Sorry, I don't know if I was mocking pastors with that voice.
Yeah, because a lot of times when that's said, it's like assumed that people have all this knowledge about God. So our problem isn't that we don't have enough knowledge. It's like when that's said, it's like, oh no, people know tons of theology. And it's like, well, this Barna research shows actually, no, they don't know. That's not our problem. But anyway.
Yeah.
So is the problem the knowledge or is it the heart? That's what you were talking about.
Well, I'm saying the problem is that we disconnect them. We disconnect the head and the heart. We disconnect knowledge, belief, and behavior. And so, and we do that right. I mean, just think about, like this core thing that we talk about, relationship with God. And how do we live and behave in our relationship with God? And it's really about an emotional connection and emotional responses versus, what you know, right? And we constantly, and that's why I was kind of doing the voice, and not mocking Christian pastors, but sometimes we as leaders, though, I hear it from leaders all the time, and authors and, whatever Christian influencers, where there's this undermining of knowledge in relationship, in kind of respect to the relationship side of things, because the relational side of things is what's really important. And we do this probably in our relationships with human beings too. Like we don't think about how our knowledge forms our character, plays an important role in forming our character, and how our character is what we behave from, right? From the heart flow the well springs of life. Our actions will flow out of what's internal, heart, character, knowledge, all of that. And that's, again, the biblical view doesn't pull those things apart. It smashes them all back together. Heart is this larger term that refers to mind and volition, willpower, affections, and intellect. And all of that together works together. It works towards who we are becoming and how we live. It's just this is dynamic interplay. So, so all that to say, we start forming our kids' worldview at very young ages. So now, but that's the hopeful part of it, though, is that at the earliest of ages, we can be having a huge impact on their lives. And
we can be forming their worldview before we think we can. We don't wait till they're in high school. But even when they are in high school, it's not too late. But but this starts early, and there is hope. And so we thought we brought this bad news. This is kind of where the church is at. So we thought on this episode we'll talk about, well, what can we do? What can we do to build a Christian worldview in our kids as best we can?
Yeah. And last week, if you hadn't done the homework from last week, you need to go back and do the homework, right? It was assessment. Test yourself to see where you're at in kind of your worldview development. Test your kids, do that assessment first. And then when maybe you see some of the struggles, even with your own kids or with your own congregation or your own youth group or your own classroom, it will motivate you to do what we're going to talk about today. Because we want to give 5 key steps, and we want to try to get really practical. And so, Erin, start us off. How do we teach our kids a Christian worldview?
So I'll try to keep it to 5, but ideas pop in my head, so I might.
Let's give 5 broad categories, and then
I'll try to keep them in categories. Okay.
Underneath.
Well, first we thought, the Sunday school answer is that you read the Bible, and that's how you develop a Christian worldview. But we actually mean it, because when you look at studies, we know that Christians don't read their Bibles. And so the majority of Christians, of course, is what I mean. So the first step to developing a Christian worldview in yourself and in your kids is to actually spend time reading the Bible. This will mean that you have to push out other things to make time to do this. So it means that instead of watching TV every day, you might have to turn it off sometimes. You might have to have everybody put their phones away. You might have to start the morning in quiet and over breakfast before everyone leaves for the day, read the Bible. Or maybe it's before bedtime, or however you work it out, but that you must, to develop a biblical worldview, you have to actually know what's in the Bible, and your kids have to know what's in the Bible. And your kids need to hear the scripture for themselves. And this has become apparent to me throughout many years of having kids, now 28 years of having kids. But I think about times...
You're old.
You're older than me, by the way. But I think about times where we've been reading the scripture, and the kids have amazing reflections and insights of things I didn't see. Or just how reading it to them, they're able to see things for themselves. And it's not from a sermon from mom or whatever.
And there's been the flip side. I mean, let's just make that clear. There's been the flip side when we've read the Bible together and you walk away discouraged as a parent because you're like, I don't think they care. So just so you know, I don't want you to paint this picture that our family is perfect and biblically, No,
but whether it's hard or discouraging or they have insights or not, the only way for them to know what God says is to read the words that God has said.
Right. And I kind of bring that up a little bit tongue in cheek, but to say, look, we don't have perfect kids, and we're not perfect parents, and we go through all those struggles. Mm-hmm. But one thing we've learned in the struggle is that you don't quit. Mm-hmm. And that oftentimes things aren't enjoyable at first as you're developing the habits, as you're practicing, as you're getting better at it. And that's why you stick it out. And now look, what's interesting is that we hold that view in like almost every other area of life except the spiritual stuff.
Well, hold what view? That you have to just push through the hard times?
I mean, if your kid is in music lessons and they come back after the first music lesson or the first day of practice and they say, I don't like this. You don't say, oh, you don't like it? Well, let's chuck piano.
Well, you shouldn't. Hopefully you don't.
Okay. I have a little higher expectations for our audience than you do, honey, but apparently Erin just revealed how low her expectations are for you guys. So just remember that about me. I'm very optimistic about you, parents out there. Think about athletics. Your kid comes home from the first day of football practice is like, nah, I'm done. This wasn't fun. I didn't enjoy it. You shouldn't say, hey, all right, quit.
Yes, please
or
don't.
Or the first day of biology class or anything. Or if you, as an adult, your first day you start a business. Like, oh my gosh, that was so much work. I didn't enjoy it. You don't say, okay, time to quit. But when it comes to spiritual things, where it's like, oh, that was hard, or we won't push through it because we haven't connected this basic common insight that with everything, including spiritual things, there's training, there's practicing, there's developing habits and discipline. So,
well, I wonder too if it's because we have false expectations of what it's going to do or what it will look like.
well, and I think
If it's connected so much with emotion.
I think there's multiple streams here.
Yeah.
So I think that it is
So we
connected
think
with emotion.
yeah.
So it's not an intellectual endeavor. And so there's just looking for this kind of immediate emotional gratification when we read the Bible or whatever. Or I got to get something out of it today. And if I didn't feel it, well, I get lukewarm towards it. There's so there's that. There is other streams. I had another thought of another kind of thing that hampers us on this, but
And you called me old.
oh man, it was another brilliant insight. Well, you know what? No, it's not. It has nothing to do with age, honey. It just is that there's so many brilliant insights, and I'm like just trying to pick them out. And sometimes they get away because there's so many of them.
It must be so hard for you. So back to actually reading the words. I was thinking of course, there's many times, and like even recently, where it takes everything in me to say to the kids, "Okay, let's sit down. We need to do our reading," because either I'm tired or busy or I don't feel like it, and so. Yeah, I never want to paint the picture that it's somehow easy to do it. Especially, I think the reason the turning off the TV and the phones thing, we are in such a technological age and we are not in a literary age. And so to have quiet and pick up a book, that's weird. That's counterculture right there.
Yeah.
And then you're picking up the same book, the Bible, over and over again. And culture just is so against us on that. But I think about over the years, the times where I've seen the good of the kids just knowing what God says for themselves. They've heard it themselves. I remember one time when we were reading through the Gospels, just kind of one after the other. Of course, this took a couple of years to do all of that. But how one time after we read a story of Jesus with the Pharisees or the Sadducees, it was one of them. But at the end I said, what do you guys think about what Jesus said? What were some of your reflections and one of our kids said, Jesus is harsh. And that to her was just, she was noticing that, and quite different than how sometimes Jesus is portrayed as kind of meek, mild, always sweet and kind.
Nice and friendly in your buddy.
But
if you have that view, if you have that view, then it's because
you probably haven't
not
read
being
the
shaped by
Gospels.
Scripture.
Yeah. So reading the Gospels helped her to see, Jesus didn't always have kind, soft words. He had harsh words.
And now you use that as a regular justification when you talk to the kids. You say, honey, I'm acting like Jesus.
I'm being harsh with you.
And so Jesus was harsh. I'm harsh. I don't have kind, soft, loving words because Jesus doesn't have kind, soft, loving words for you. So it's been a really good tool that Erin has used.
Oh,
in
my
disciplining
word.
the kids.
Anyways, so point number 1, how to develop a Christian worldview, how to help do that for your kids is first just to read the Bible to your kids, not to neglect it.
Okay,
and if start doing it again.
Can I pose a question? Because I want to get in the shoes of maybe some of the listeners out there who are saying, okay, I have a 3 and 5 year old at home, or I have a 3, 5, 7, and 10-year-old at home. Okay, how do I? What would you say, just real practically? How do I do that? What do I do?
Well, we've talked about resources on other podcasts, but I would always aim towards the oldest kids. So maybe for the 3, if you have a 10-year-old all the way down to a 2-year-old, you can have a family time where you're reading, but expect the 2-year-old to play with blocks, and they'll pick up stuff. But maybe you at other times read them a really children's Bible for 2-year-olds that are shorter stories. But I would aim it towards the oldest kid and start reading. So if you have a 10-year-old, you can read straight from the scriptures. It might be good to start with like a NIV or a translation that's easier to understand, and pick a book and just start reading.
Yeah. And so you don't need fancy curriculum.
No, I wouldn't.
You're not
spend
talking
any
about
money.
even like teaching a lesson.
No.
You're just saying read the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah.
How primitive.
And if you have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, then read the Jesus Storybook Bible or the Big Picture. So you can start with
Story Bible.
with a Bible that summarizes things, but the kids are getting this picture of God's big story, what he's done, what he's still doing, and then what he's gonna do in the end. And so you're starting to develop for them a biblical worldview that we're a part of this bigger story.
Yeah. And so and I think part of it is we just got to raise the expectations for our kids. Mm-hmm. That you got a 10, 7, 5-year-old, you can expect for them to sit at the table and to listen to one chapter of the scriptures and to read along with you.
Yeah.
And if your kids aren't there, then raise the bar for them and expect more out of them. And kids have this incredible ability to reach up and grab that bar when we raise the bar.
And if you haven't been in the habit of doing it, don't assume they're going to enjoy it, because they are used to this culture. We are used to this culture of quick, being entertained constantly. And so to sit on the couch with you while you read, and maybe you pop popcorn, or if it's in the morning, maybe they're eating their cereal while you're reading, but that they're quiet and listening and you're reading aloud to them. If this is new, they're not going to do cartwheels about it when you first start.
And if your kids are on screens every single day for hours upon, in each day, they're going to have to detox.
Yeah.
But you got to stick with it. You be consistent over time. Give it a whole year, right? Before you might see some of the real fruit. But this is the idea. You sow. There's so much sowing that we do in those early years and not a whole lot of reaping sometimes. You stick with it, even if you're not seeing the instant results that our culture has conditioned us to expect.
Yeah.
Okay, so step number 1, read the Bible to your kids. Seems obvious enough, but that is the foundation. Number 2, okay, so we've got this larger category. This is step number 2. Connect the head and the heart for your kids. Now, we got to cash this out. And what we're trying to do, and we've talked a little bit about this, but it's connecting believing with behaving. But when you and I were kind of prepping for this, the way you had put it was helping your kids see that the world doesn't revolve around them. And so unpack that a little bit more, because and I want us to bridge the gap between that kind of example and connecting head and heart. So what are we talking about here? How do we connect head and heart for our kids that helps them to develop a Christian worldview?
So when I say teach them that the world doesn't revolve around them, it's that we're teaching them reality. And so the human tendency is to think we are the center of the universe, but we're not. We know we're not. And so you're connecting reality with their feelings and their behaviors. And so you can, I'm thinking of a million practical things, but.
So let me, before you get into that, so I just want to narrate this for the audience, is that kind of thing, teaching our kids to be selfless, life doesn't revolve around you, is helping them also form ideas about the world. And that's what you mean when you say that you're teaching them about reality.
Yeah.
So this is, again, connecting head and heart. Okay.
So you're teaching them Christian truth, that they're valuable, that they were made uniquely, and that they were made for a purpose. and that they were made on purpose. Their life isn't a mistake. But also, so they're very valuable, but also they're not the sun in the universe. God is the center of the universe. And so your heart is going to nudge you towards being selfish, or, whatever it is, all kinds of practical things that happen. But we're connecting with them. No, that's not reality. Reality is that we were made to serve God and serve others. We talked about this a little bit in the podcast about the Christian worldview and how people don't believe that living for God is really the main purpose of life. And so we want to show them that it is the main purpose of life and that this is a good way to live.
Okay, so all right, I'm just trying to drill down and make this practical. So, okay, what are you talking about, discipline here?
So I'm talking about developing virtue in our kids.
Which is connected to discipline.
Yes.
Because we'd say there's discipline to correct the bad behavior, to shape character, to develop virtue. So that's where we want people to connect head and heart. Is like, okay, you feel like, I'm disciplining my kid and I'm just correcting their behavior. No, it goes deeper. That is actually connected to what they will eventually believe about reality.
And the kinds of people they will become.
Yeah, and this is, Scripture connects belief and behavior all the time. Like Romans 1:18, right? For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all the ungodliness and unrighteousness of man, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. So that's Romans 1:18. There's the connection. Suppress the truth, an activity of the mind, right? In our sin. We have the Psalms talking about how the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And then the very next phrase, it talks about how they live immorally. And so we see this all throughout Scripture.
Yeah. So we don't want to separate that for our kids. We want to connect all the time with how we live and the ways we think with the ideas that we have about God, about other people, about ourselves.
And I want to say it goes both ways. Meaning you don't just believe them behave. Sometimes that's the way it works. You come to strong beliefs and convictions, and then that shapes what you do, right? It also works the other way. You can behave your way into believing things. We especially see this with sin. And that's why this is so important for our kids. Because if we let them develop habits of sin, if we don't correct their sinful behavior, if we allow them to develop a love of sin, then they can behave themselves into ways of believing. And this is where you have the individual who begins to walk down a path of unrighteousness and then starts to deny God, deny his scripture, deny his authority.
Yeah, you can see it in so many things. Of course, we all could probably think of examples for ourselves, but you think about a Christian who, over COVID, a lot of people got out of the habit of going to church. And so a lot of Christians now, what was revealed is really their theology of church and how important it is. But Christians now have convinced themselves that being in a local church and attending every week, that isn't that important, even though the scriptures warn against that. And so we can convince ourselves, you know what? Sleeping in has made me more comfortable. It's made me feel better. I can still pray and talk to God. So these sorts of things, even though scripture warns against doing that, instructs us to do that. So there's all kinds of ways that we can, our heart, our behavior can pull us in ways to make us think things that aren't true.
Yeah. Now, look, there's a really good resource. In fact, I think it's one of the most important books that's been written in the last 30 years by J.P. Moreland, who we've talked about. He's done events he's done podcast interviews for us, and he's been a huge mentor. But his book, Love Your God with All Your Mind, subtitled The Role of Reason in the Life of the Soul, is such an important book. And I would encourage you, if you haven't read it, you got to read it. And I would encourage groups of parents maybe set aside your small group curriculum or whatever, your Bible study, and read this together with other folks. It'll challenge you, but this will lay out a brand new vision for most people when it comes to the life of the mind. But he's got a chapter, and this is the older version. This is not the updated one. There's a revised and expanded version. I think it still is chapter 5. It's called Clearing the Cobwebs from My Mental Attic. And this is under the section of how to develop a mature Christian mind, which is related to the idea of developing a biblical worldview. But he's got the section on forming habits of the mind. And I think he captures what we're trying to capture here. He says, and this is under the section of the formation of virtue. But he says this, he says, a mature person has a tightly integrated, well-ordered soul. A carefully developed mind is a crucial part of a well-ordered soul. A mind that is learning to function well is both part of and made possible by an overall life that is skillfully lived. You cannot learn to use your mind well for Christ's sake by just reading a logic book or taking more adult education courses. You must order your general lifestyle in such a way that a maturing intellect emerges as part of that lifestyle. If you want to develop a Christian mind, you must intend to order your overall form of life to make this possible. You can't just read a book or two and add this to a lifestyle otherwise indifferent to the intellect. And that's just a kind of taste of what he's getting at. But a couple of things there, and that's what we're trying to do here, is connect this overall way of life with Christian worldview, with the mind. And so that's why this idea of connecting head and heart is so important, and helping our kids early on, right? Because they're not going to get some of the abstract parts of Christian worldview, but they can be developing the overall lifestyle that will contribute to them developing a Christian worldview. Okay. We need to move on to step number 3. Step number 3 is serve others.
Now, what does that have to do with a Christian worldview, Brett?
I have no idea, because this was the point you suggested, and I said, I don't think that's going to work, but you insisted, honey. So you tell us why. What does this have to do with serving? That's not thinking.
Well, actually, what you talked about, behaving our way into beliefs, serving others is one of those ways that we develop a Christian worldview, because we see others, we put others as more important than ourselves. And we start to see other people the way God sees other people. And that helps our kids to develop a Christian worldview of the world, of other people. Because what's the chief end of life? You know, Jesus talks about so it's loving God and loving our neighbors. And so the very practical thing that so many people don't do of serving others can help your kids to develop a Christian worldview.
Yeah. So it's not enough to simply say, hey, Jesus' command. The greatest command is love God, and the second is to love others. And we can say that, and we need to say that, and we need to teach it, and we need to explain the what and the why behind it. But also, we need to live that out. We need to help, again, shaping their character so that they are more and more disposed to live in obedience to that.
Yeah, and it helps them to see that what Jesus says and what he teaches is actually true. That when we give up our lives, we will find it. And when we put others above ourselves, that will bring us joy that we cannot find when the center of our world is ourselves.
Yeah, what you said there, it was so good. It got me thinking about how it's just not enough to talk. It's not enough to just teach it.
No.
To read a book or to sit in the classroom.
No.
Which sometimes is that's one of the maybe the weak points in a lot of worldview training, is that it's just all in the classroom. It's all in the books. And this point here hits on why we got to get it out of the classroom and into real life. It's a way of life, not just a way of thinking.
Yeah. I was talking to a young girl in her 20s, and she was just this last week, and she was telling me how formative her grandmother was in her life. And her grandmother is someone who started a ministry for mentally handicapped adults. So these are adults who basically aren't seen in society. Anyway, so this young girl's telling me about her grandma, and then how that led to her mom being a part of this ministry, and then now how it's led her to be not only a special ed teacher during the day, but she volunteers hundreds of hours with special needs adults, serving them. But when you hear her talk about this group of people, you hear the voice of God as she's talking about them, like how valuable they are, how unique they are, how they each have a name. And although they have struggles in some areas, they have gifts in other areas. And you see, she has a Christian worldview of people. And she sees people differently than the way a lot of us do. Yeah. And so, of course, her worldview has been shaped directly by seeing her grandma serve, seeing her mom serve, and now serving with her own life too.
Yeah.
And so we can't separate how we live with, we can't just keep it in the books. It is important when we're going to talk about one of our next ones is teaching our kids the why. That's really important.
Well, this is where sometimes I think we'll make this artificial distinction. We'll say, well, it's not taught, it's caught. This is taught and caught. It's both.
Yeah.
We need both. And so, but sometimes it starts by being caught first. And as it's caught, it's taught. Right. And so our kids see us and we're pulling them into the serving others. And if you want some good ideas on this, I mean, Rosaria Butterfield's The Gospel Comes with a House Key has some great examples. I love how she talks about using technology, the Nextdoor app on her phone to see what are the needs in her neighborhood, and then she meets them that way.
Yeah, and how her kids are involved in the serving of others, how it's not this artificial life where she's like doing forcing this thing on the side, but it's just a way of life for them. They're around for their neighbors. They walk their neighbors' dogs. They know who they are. She tells stories about people in their church. There's all kinds of ways that her family serves others, and it's just a part of the rhythm of their life.
Yeah. And so no matter how young your kids are, bring them with you to serve. Because sometimes we're well-intentioned and we'll go serve and we'll leave the kids at home.
Yeah.
Bring your kids with you to as much as possible.
You can. Yeah.
Okay, so that's number 3, serve others. Number 4, teach the why. And we pounded on this before, but we got to say it again. This is so vital in teaching a Christian worldview. And so it's not just the what. And this is where you go revisit some of our conversation about belief in the past. We don't want our kids to simply believe something. And we don't want them to be like 51-49, like 51%. Yeah, I believe it, right? But we talk, and this is back to JP's book. He talks about these 3 aspects of belief: the content, the strength, and the centrality. And you build into those first 2, and it brings those beliefs, that worldview, more central. So content. Knowing what we believe, knowing why we believe it, going deeper and deeper and deeper, and not just being satisfied with the shallow, I believe that God exists.
Yeah.
No, who is God?
Yeah.
What's his nature? What's his character? What are his attributes? How can you define them? Who's the Trinity? Knowing the biblical view of God.
Well, going back to the Barna study, like one of the questions of, 1 in 4 Christian young people think the Bible's true. And so that's teaching the why. Why do we think the Bible is actually the Word of God? Now, if you're thinking, I don't know what I would say, we've said before, and we'll say again, that's okay. Do it with your kids. So read Cold Case Christianity with your kids.
Yeah. J. Warner Wallace, he's been one of our speakers at the Maven conference, has written a good, accessible book. And there are parent or adult versions that adults and teens can read
easily.
And then there's a kids version and online resources. And it's like, I think the kids version are from like 8 to 12-year-olds, but those are very helpful resources.
Yeah. And read it together with your kids. If you don't know it, that's okay. Just learn it right along with them. There also, I was thinking about Jonathan Morrow's book,
Questioning the
Bible. And he goes through, I think, 10 arguments for believing, or maybe it's even more. But that's a great book to read yourself and know it. Or if you have older kids, read it with them.
The great thing, I think it's 11 challenges of the Bible that he covers. And what's great about his book is, number one, it's very accessible and readable, but it's comprehensive. I mean, it talks about the canon of Scripture. How did we get the books of the Bible together? I mean, how that all take place, the historical reliability of it, the divine inspiration of it. He deals with some of the contemporary challenges. So
teach the why. Don't let your kids graduate from your home without teaching them some of the why of what we believe.
And I think we have got to develop an impulse in ourselves to be always asking the why. Why do we believe this? How did we come to this conclusion? What are the reasons for this? So that we can get better at teaching our kids that. And that's by the time they are in late elementary, you better be giving them apologetics.
Yeah.
If not sooner. So in apologetics, making a defense of the faith. Okay, so teach the why.
Lastly, I mean, there's so many more things I want to say, but we'll end with...
Oh, wait, no. We have, before, on one of the things of teaching the why, we talked about how Maven immersive experiences are such a great tool. And we've said this before.
These are the trips we do with students.
I'll say it again. These are literally the best program for students out there. Yeah. And I say this after 30 years of experience with young people, working in youth ministry, working in parachurch ministry, working in the local church, working with thousands of students across the U.S. Okay, so I just want you to know I'm an authoritative voice here. I'm an expert. There's nothing I've seen that has more of an impact than our immersive experiences. And that's why we are working our tails off to just keep scaling that. And if you don't have a youth group or a church or a Christian school that is interested in this, you can still send your kid to this. We have an open enrollment trip next July.
Open enrollment meaning anyone can sign up.
Anybody across the U.S.
high school
or outside
students,
of the U.S.
right?
Yeah, can send their kid, high school or college, to Utah next July, and we will help train you beforehand. They'll come together with other Christian students. Our staff will take them and lead them and guide them, and we will help them to learn the why, the biblical reasons why we hold to Trinitarian doctrine, why we hold to salvation by faith. Through faith by grace. And so anyway, that just want to put that out there. Go to the Maven website, Micah, our podcast producer. You need to get a link for that open enrollment trip. We'll put a link in the description.
So last thing, as I said, we could say a lot more. I was thinking about all kinds of things. We want to have our kids to have mentors and heroes and all kinds of people.
But we had to title this five reasons.
But you made us title it 5. So the last thing we would say is part of developing a Christian worldview in our kids is to learn to critique the culture around them. So this is kind of a big one. And there's lots of ways to critique the culture. And you might be thinking, well, that's kind of a negative one.
Yeah, it is. Oh, no. But it's the side of the kind of Christian worldview training that says, okay, now that you're grounded in the truth, we want to take that and we want to now compare it to the counterfeits that are out there. And so our philosophy has been teach your kids truth first before you expose them to error. But you lay that foundation, then we want them to be looking outward. So often this is when they're a little bit older. where you're exposing them more to the culture, or they're out in the world a little bit more, or they're noticing a bit more. And so this is us recently being in Columbus, Ohio, walking the streets of Columbus, seeing pride flags everywhere, seeing signs in the businesses about, some LGBTQ issue or what have you, and talking with our 15-year-old and 12-year-old as we're walking the streets. Let's see, but 15 and 11-year-old at that time, walking the streets and critiquing, and helping them notice. So it's something like that. It's going to the movies and watching maybe the latest Disney movie, and sinning while you watch Disney movies. No, I'm just kidding. No, but saying, hey, we're gonna watch this movie and we're gonna afterwards discuss it. Or maybe if you're watching it at home, you're hitting pause and going, okay, what just played out? What are the ideas there? What do the actions tell you? Who's the hero? Who's the villain? What do these things tell you about the worldview of this movie, and the worldview ideas? And so it's critiquing the movies or the TV show.
It's having conversations with people who do not believe what we believe, and having that be a part of what your kids do. And of course, we're around people who don't believe what we believe all the time, but actually having conversations with people about, so what do you believe about God? Or, you're a Buddhist family and live in the neighborhood, so let's have them over for dinner and ask them about their faith and what they believe. And so this can be in all kinds of ways, but having them hear from people who believe differently than what we believe.
And if you're sitting there going, well, it's hard to get into those discussions with a neighbor, and okay, fine, that shouldn't be an excuse that gets us off the hook, but make it a little bit easier for everybody. Call up the local Buddhist temple or the mosque or the Universalist church and say, hey, or you can get some other parents together, or get your homeschool co-op together, or get your youth group together and do a field trip. And those folks, when you call them and say, hey, we've got some Christian kids, we want to expose them to other ideas and think carefully about them, and we want to do it in a loving, gracious, civil manner, but we want to do it intelligently. Would you be willing to talk to our kids? I mean, those people are almost always going to say yes, and we know this because we've done it. Or when the Mormon missionaries or the Jehovah's Witnesses knock on your door, do not turn them away. Invite them back for a scheduled appointment when your whole family is going to sit down and do this together, your kids right along with you. And so those are different ways. Here's something I just did with Jonah the other day. I saw a tweet, or it's not a tweet anymore. What is it called? An X? I mean, Elon Musk just messed up the whole deal. And everyone, it's just funny.
It was a verb, and
always,
now we don't know what to say.
They always say the website formerly known as Twitter, X. Anyway, I saw a tweet.
Everyone knows what you mean.
I have got to figure out what's the correct. I haven't kept up, or at least I guess I haven't noticed. Anyway, a post.
You're on Twitter.
It was a post on X.
Isn't that
It
bad?
used to be Twitter. No, is it bad? No, because I'm an influencer.
Oh,
I'm a social media influencer. But I saw this post on X, and it was a Christian, I would say a liberal Christian, who does not, I think, hold biblical views. And he was making a comment about the Israeli-Palestine war that's going on. I was going to say conflict. It's not conflict, it's war, and it's terrorism and Hamas. But he was talking about, he was applying Jesus's teaching to individuals to love your enemy, the direction that Jesus gives to individuals, and to a personal ethic. And he was applying it to kind of government. That was the implication of what he was saying. You're supposed to love your enemies. And so we shouldn't advocate for violence, meaning Israel doesn't have a right to respond. And so I saw that, and I think that is a great example of doing theology really badly or poorly, or being really mistaken in your views, because the Bible does clearly talk about, in Romans 13, government's role in bearing the sword, and that there can be just wars, and there's a whole history in Christian thinking about this, right? So anyway, I saw the bad thinking, and so I showed it to Jonah. I said, Jonah, read this. Here's what this guy is saying. And I didn't give Jonah the answer. I said, so what do you think about this? Because if he's right, and Jesus says, love your enemies, and that means that Israel should kind of turn the other cheek or not deal with the terrorists who are holding hostages. And I go furthermore, this would also mean that if this guy's correct, this Christian is correct in his interpretation of what Jesus said, that means the U.S. should never have stopped Nazi Germany from taking over Europe. And any other example you could give in history where there was a just war, where it stopped evil in the world. I go, what do you think about this? And I let him chew on it and wrestle with it. And then we talked through it. And then I critiqued it with him. And we talked about the difference between the personal ethic that we are to practice as individuals, and then the different sphere of sovereignty that the state is over, and the different responsibilities they have, and what's permissible for the state is not permissible for me as an individual. Yeah, as an individual, I am to act differently to my neighbor, but a country and a government has obligations to protect its citizens, and so a terrorist organization, a foreign invader, they have the right and the obligation to act. So we had that conversation, but that was an example of me seeing this, and I could have just read it myself and thought about it myself, but I said, oh, this is a great opportunity to get Jonah to think about this.
Yeah.
And critique the culture.
The point is, there's stuff all around. This is actually easier, I think, than we think. Yeah. So the Israel-Hamas thing is a perfect example of talking about it with our kids. How do we respond? Does God give us any insight on how to think about these things that are happening all around us? So take reality, take the things they're seeing, and help them think through it, and take them to what God says and help them chew on it. Yeah. And so
there you go. 5 easy steps to develop a bit.
5 foolproof steps.
Yeah. This will guarantee, money back guarantee, your kids will never go astray. No, look, if you're thinking, wow, that was a lot, I can't do all 5 of those. Yeah, that's okay. We're laying out 5 different steps. Take one of them. Start with one and then build on it. And then until it becomes habit, it becomes part of the culture of your family. And by doing so, by intentionally starting with the small steps, you can really create a culture that helps develop a biblical worldview in your kids.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.